You wake up, 6 a.m. The alarm screams, your body feels like lead, but the gurus say winners wake at 5. The articles promise productivity. The executives brag about their 4 a.m. routines. So you drag yourself up, you force it, day after day, week after week. And here's what nobody tells you. Your body is keeping score. The science shows something different than what the hustle culture sells. Forcing yourself to wake early when your biology says otherwise doesn't make you more productive. It makes you sick, stressed, fat, depressed, and the data is stacking up in labs across the world right now. This isn't about discipline. This isn't about weakness. In 2025, researchers at Frontiers in Neuroscience published findings on 224,714 people. Morning types, who wake naturally, show specific brain structures. Evening types show different ones. Your hippocampus volumes differ. Your subcortical structures differ. The architecture of your brain reflects your chronotype. You cannot discipline your way out of your neurobiology. Published April 2024, examining social jet lag effects across 1,042 participants in Sao Paulo. These are peer-reviewed studies tracking real physiological markers, not productivity blog posts. Now back to the information. School starts at 8. Offices open at 9. The world runs on morning type time. And when your genes say wake at 9, but your job says be there at 7, your body enters a state called social jet lag. The term sounds harmless. It's not. In 2024, researchers in Japan studied 4,505 workers. They measured sleep debt using something called the Sleep Debt Index. They measured social jet lag. They ran the numbers on depression scores, sleepiness, work performance. The interaction was brutal. When social jet lag exceeded 2 hours, depression scores spiked. When sleep debt topped 2 hours, sleepiness became disabling. These two forces together, chronotype mismatch and sleep loss, created a spiral. Productivity collapsed. Mental health collapsed. This wasn't in shift workers. This was in regular 9-to-5 employees who thought they were just waking up early. In 2022, researchers at Nature studied 66 female hospital workers during day shifts and night shifts. They measured salivary cortisol at awakening and 30 minutes later. When shift workers woke from day sleep after night shifts, their cortisol awakening response dropped by 11.07 units compared to waking from night sleep. Early chronotypes got hit hardest, a drop of 16.61 units. Intermediate types dropped 11.82 units. Late types only 6.27 units. The takeaway? When early types are forced to wake at the wrong circadian time, their stress hormone system misfires. And in January 2025, a massive study published in Proceedings of the Royal Society examined 201 healthy volunteers using continuous cortisol monitoring. They found cortisol starts rising well before you wake, 97 minutes before for long sleepers, only 12 minutes after for short sleepers. The act of waking doesn't trigger the response. Your circadian clock does. Force the wake time wrong, and you're fighting your biology every single morning. Sustained attention. They show low verbal fluency, poor executive control. Evening chronotypes, better information processing speed. When researchers test people at their optimal time versus non-optimal time, performance gaps appear. Late chronotypes, tested at 8 a.m. show significantly worse reaction times on psychomotor vigilance tasks compared to testing at 8 p.m. One study tracked 25 early chronotypes and 31 late chronotypes across morning, afternoon, and evening testing. Late types in the morning were catastrophically impaired. Sleepiness was higher, performance was worse, but by evening, they matched or beat the early types. The reverse held true. Early types peaked in morning, crashed by evening. The pattern was consistent. The problem is, most workplaces, most schools, most exams happen in the morning. So late chronotypes spend their entire lives performing below their actual capability. Sleep quality mediated 13.52% of that decline. Smoking mediated another 18.64%. But the chronotype effect remained even after controlling for those factors. Translation? Late types forced into early schedules accumulate cognitive damage over time. The effect compounds. By middle age, the gap is measurable. And this wasn't small. The Lifeline's cohort study in the Netherlands followed 23,798 people for 10 years. The association between chronotype mismatch and cognitive decline was real, measurable, and dose-dependent. One meta-analysis pooled data from 27 studies. Evening types had significantly higher body mass index than morning types. Odds ratio 1.17 for type 2 diabetes. Mean hemoglobin A1C difference 0.35 units higher. These aren't lifestyle choices. These are biological consequences of chronic circadian misalignment. In 2024, researchers at Frontiers in Endocrinology laid out the mechanism. Late chronotypes have higher levels of proteins linked to insulin resistance and cardiovascular disease. Retinoic acid receptor protein 2, fatty acid binding protein adipocytes, tissue type plasminogen activator inhibitor, all elevated. The circadian clock regulates glucose metabolism through the suprachiasmatic nucleus. When you force wake times that conflict with that clock, glucose tolerance worsens. Insulin sensitivity drops. Fat accumulates. The body stores energy differently when eating and waking happen at the wrong circadian phase. When forced to wake early, leptin dropped 17%. Glucose rose during the biological night by 4%, peak to trough. The behavioral cycle and the circadian cycle were fighting, and the metabolic system broke. This is what social jet lag does every single day. Vetter and colleagues at Diabetes Care in 2015 studied over 60,000 women in the Nurses' Health Study. They looked at chronotype and shift work interaction. Early chronotypes doing rotating night shifts showed increased diabetes risk with longer exposure. Late chronotypes showed elevated risk even in day work when their schedule didn't involve nights. The mismatch itself, waking early when your body wants to wake late, was metabolically destructive. The risk was dose dependent. The longer the exposure, the worse the outcome. Social jet lag above 1 hour hits 23% of the general population. Above 2 hours hits 12%. In 2023, a systematic review in BMC Psychiatry pooled 8 studies on young people aged 10 to 24. Social jet lag correlated with depressive symptoms. The effect was independent of sleep quality, independent of sleep duration. The mismatch itself drove the depression. Another systematic review published in Clinical Medicine in April 2025 searched through June 2024 data. They found that sleep duration and chronotype both independently predicted depression risk. But when circadian misalignment entered the model, it dominated. Eveningness led to higher depression rates. But the pathway ran through sleep disturbance. Chronotype didn't directly cause depression. It caused sleep disturbance. Sleep disturbance caused depression. Force an evening type to wake early. They accumulate sleep debt, sleep quality collapses, and depression follows. Self-reported chronotype. Anxiety, depression. Anxiety and depression acted as bridge symptoms connecting chronotype and daytime sleepiness to broader emotional disturbance. The researchers noted that when a naturally evening type person is forced to adhere to an early morning schedule, it results in sleep deprivation and chronotype disruption, which contributes to negative emotional states. The key word, forced. When social schedules force the mismatch, the cascade begins. Occupational factors. Health-related productivity loss was 5.36% higher in evening types. The gradient was clear. Morning types had the best workability and lowest productivity loss. Intermediate types fell in the middle. Evening types suffered most. And this pattern held across gender, age, occupation, and shift work status. Another study from Japan in 2022 examined AAHT 1,155 office workers. They found chronotype didn't directly affect presenteeism, the productivity loss while at work, but it worked indirectly through sleep disturbance. Eveningness caused sleep disturbance. Sleep disturbance caused productivity collapse. The mediation was complete. Unless you fix the sleep, the performance doesn't recover. And you can't fix the sleep if you're waking at the wrong time for your biology. Forcing everyone onto the same schedule punishes the minority and gains nothing. The study calculated exact numbers. A later sleep onset added 0.29% per hour to productivity loss. An early forced wake-up added 0.14% per hour. Eveningness itself added 0.27% per hour. These aren't rounding errors. Across millions of workers, this is billions in lost economic output. Academic performance follows the same pattern. Multiple studies show morning types achieve higher grades. But the explanation isn't that morning people are smarter. It's that classes and exams happen in the morning. Evening types struggle to wake up. They need more time to reach full cognitive function. Morning types go to bed early, wake early, and align naturally with school schedules. Evening types go to bed late, get up early to match the schedule, develop sleep disorders, and underperform relative to their actual ability. An Italian study by Monterulli in 2019 showed morning type students scored higher on exams. A study on undergraduate students in 2024 confirmed morning chronotypes had better academic performance. The mechanism is timing, not intelligence. Test evening types in the evening, and the gap disappears or reverses. Late chronotypes at 8 a.m. showed significantly higher sleepiness, measured on the Karolinska Sleepiness Scale, compared to early types. Psychomotor vigilance task performance was significantly worse. Morning testing hit late types harder than afternoon or evening. The diurnal variation was brutal for late types. Morning was their cognitive nadir. But for early types, morning was peak performance. Executive function followed the same pattern. Early types in morning sessions showed significantly better performance than afternoon or evening. Late types showed the reverse. One critical finding, the rate of cognitive decline. When executive function was assessed as a whole, evening types outperformed morning types on information processing speed. But morning types outperformed evening types on sustained attention and executive control. The problem? Most work in school demand sustained attention and executive control during morning hours. Evening types are set up to fail. Late chronotypes with early schedules showed elevated cardiovascular risk markers. Blood pressure regulation depends on circadian alignment. The normal circadian rhythm of blood pressure involves a dip during sleep and a rise upon waking. Chronic circadian misalignment disrupts that dip. Elevated nighttime blood pressure follows. In 2022, a meta-analysis found evening chronotype associated with higher odds of metabolic syndrome, higher triglycerides, lower HDL cholesterol. Another study in middle-aged adults showed evening types had 3.36 times higher odds of type 2 diabetes and 5.89 times higher odds of cardiovascular disease compared to morning types after adjusting for body mass index, sleep quality, and diet adherence. The confidence intervals were wide due to small sample size, but the direction was consistent. The American Heart Association released a scientific statement on circadian health and cardiometabolic disease. They noted shift work increases systolic and diastolic blood pressure and hypertension risk. They noted meal timing affects blood pressure control. They noted early time restricted eating and earlier meal patterns linked to lower blood pressure. They noted circadian rhythm of blood pressure is disrupted in chronic kidney disease, suggesting circadian disruption may be particularly relevant to cardiovascular kidney metabolic health. And while shift work is the extreme case, social jet lag in non-shift workers creates a milder but chronic version of the same pathology. Waking at 6 a.m. when your circadian clock says 9 a.m. is a daily insult to your cardiovascular system. Day after day, year after year, the damage accumulates. But even after adjusting for lifestyle, residual risk remains, and the mismatch itself matters. A Mendelian randomization approach would clarify causality, but observational data stacks up. Eveningness predicts metabolic disease. Circadian misalignment predicts metabolic disease. Force eveningness into morning schedules, and both hit at once. A systematic review in Sleep Journal published June 2025 searched databases through October 2024. They examined chronotype, sleep timing, sleep regularity, and cancer risk. Most studies found null associations, but some suggested intermediate chronotype showed inverse association with endometrial cancer compared to morning type. When measured differently, no association appeared. Breast cancer showed elevated risk among neither morning nor evening types compared to definite morning type in one large cohort. The data is mixed, but the biological plausibility is there. Circadian disruption affects cell cycle control. Melatonin has oncostatic properties. Chronic sleep disruption and circadian misalignment could theoretically increase cancer risk through multiple pathways. The evidence isn't definitive yet, but absence of proof isn't proof of absence. The concern remains. Light exposure can shift circadian phase, but the range of shift is limited. An evening type can move their sleep earlier by maybe an hour or two. With aggressive light therapy and melatonin supplementation, they don't become a morning type. The underlying biology persists, and even if you force the earlier sleep and wake times, the internal desynchronization remains. Your peripheral clocks and organs don't necessarily follow your imposed schedule. Your liver might still be in evening mode while your alarm forces morning wakefulness. This internal desynchrony is metabolically costly. They found actual sleep timing as a stronger predictor of mental health than chronotype preference. Late-night sleep patterns consistently linked to poorer mental health across cross-sectional and longitudinal studies, but the mechanisms aren't fully explained by reduced sleep duration or being awake during biological nighttime. Modifiable social and environmental factors play a role. In other words, the damage comes not just from being a night owl. The damage comes from the mismatch between what you are and what society forces you to do. An evening type living in a society that lets them wake at 10 a.m. might be fine. An evening type forced to wake at 6 a.m. suffers on sleepiness. But after controlling for age, sex, body mass index, work schedule, and chronotype, the association weakened. The indirect effect of social jet lag on sleep debt and then on sleepiness was significant. Social jet lag causes sleep debt. Sleep debt causes sleepiness. Sleepiness impairs function. The chain is clear. Prevalence of social jet lag over 1 hour was 23%. Over 2 hours was 12%. Mean sleep variability was 41 minutes. Those numbers represent millions of people living in chronic circadian misalignment. Their bodies are in one time zone. Their schedules force them into another every weekday. Psychological distress. Adjusted odds ratio 5.61 for presenteeism, 7.29 for psychological distress. Sleep debt and social jet lag had smaller but significant effects. But all three, insomnia, sleep debt, social jet lag, interconnected. Evening types working standard morning schedules experience all three. Insomnia because they can't fall asleep early enough. Sleep debt because they have to wake before they've slept enough. Social jet lag because their weekday schedule conflicts with their biological weekend preference. The cumulative burden is staggering. Social jet lag itself is calculated as the difference between mid-sleep on free days and mid-sleep on work days. The bigger that difference, the worse the outcomes. People try to correct on weekends. They sleep in. They feel better temporarily. Then Monday arrives and the cycle restarts. The biological system never fully recovers. It's like constantly jet lagging back and forth across time zones without ever leaving your city. Some chronotypes face specific vulnerabilities. Early chronotypes forced into night shift work show the steepest cortisol awakening response decrements. The study in hospital workers showed early types lost 16.61 cortisol units when waking from day sleep after night shift. Late types only lost 6.27 units. Early types are physiologically less equipped for schedule flexibility. They adapt poorly to misalignment in either direction. But society assumes everyone can just wake earlier with enough discipline. The biology says no. Forced circadian misalignment in early types is just as damaging as in late types. The direction of the insult differs. The harm doesn't. Peak eveningness hits around age 20. Then circadian preference gradually shifts back toward morningness through adulthood and into old age. This creates a cruel irony. Teenagers, who are biologically programmed to wake late, attend schools that start at 7:30 or 8 a.m. They're sleep deprived by design. Their evening-shifted circadian phase collides with early morning demands. Academic performance suffers, mental health suffers, and then society blames them for being lazy. The biology is screaming otherwise. Hormonal differences, sleep architecture differences, and circadian amplitude differences all likely contribute. But the takeaway is consistent. Chronotype matters for health. Mismatch matters for disease risk, and the effects are measurable and reproducible across populations. Flexible work hours. Later, school start times for adolescents. Recognition that productivity isn't maximized by forcing everyone onto identical schedules. The morning bias in society is cultural, not scientific. Morning types have advantages in standard schedules. Evening types face systematic disadvantage. And intermediate types, the majority, suffer when schedules lean too far in either direction. The data supports flexibility. Let people wake when their biology dictates. Measure output, not hours. Judge performance, not attendance. The technology exists. Remote work-proof flexibility works. But the cultural assumption persists that early waking equals virtue. And millions of people internalize the message that if they're not waking early, they're failing. The science shows the opposite. Forcing your wake time against your chronotype doesn't build discipline. It builds sleep debt. It builds metabolic dysfunction. It builds depression. It builds cardiovascular risk. The costs are real. The benefits are mythology. An evening type waking at 5 a.m. isn't more productive. They're impaired, sleepy, cognitively compromised, operating below their capability, and they'll pay the price in health outcomes over the following decades. The mechanisms are understood. The interventions are obvious. Align behavior with biology. Let morning types wake early. Let evening types wake late. Stop forcing everyone into a one-size-fits-all schedule designed for a minority of the population. The cost of continuing current practice is measured in quality-adjusted life years, healthcare spending, lost productivity, and human suffering. The evening chronotypes aren't lazy. The intermediate types aren't indecisive. These are genetic variants of a circadian system that evolved over millions of years. Having population-level variation in chronotype probably served evolutionary advantage, someone always awake to guard the group. But modern society flattened that variation with industrial work schedules. The 9 to 5 didn't arise from biology. It arose from factory optimization, and we've been paying the price ever since. Sleep medicine addressing circadian misalignment, not just sleep duration. The science is there. The obstacles are cultural and institutional. But the human cost of inaction keeps mounting. Every morning someone drags themselves out of bed at the wrong time for their biology. They think they're being disciplined. They're being damaged. Melatonin supplementation in the evening can shift phase earlier. Avoiding blue light at night prevents phase delay. Consistent sleep schedules, 7 days a week, minimize social jet lag. Time-restricted eating aligned with circadian rhythm improves metabolic outcomes. Exercise at the right time can shift circadian phase. These tools exist, but they're band-aids on a structural problem. You can shift your sleep by an hour or two. You can minimize the damage, but you can't fundamentally change your genetic chronotype. An evening type can become an earlier evening type with aggressive intervention. They don't become a morning type. And even that shift requires constant effort and discipline. Stop the interventions and chronotype drifts back to baseline. Actigraphy provides objective sleep-wake data. The data is becoming easier to collect. But the question remains, what do we do with the data? If we confirm someone has 2 hours of social jet lag, the solution isn't an app. The solution is a schedule change. And most people can't change their work schedule. Schools can't change their start times without district-wide coordination. The individual solution is limited. The systemic solution requires collective action. And current schedules harm significant portions of the population. The percentage of people with clinically significant social jet lag exceeds 20% in most studies. That's 1 in 5 workers, 1 in 5 students. The scale of the problem is massive. The lack of societal response is puzzling. Mental health improved. The evidence was strong enough to drive policy change in some districts, but most resist. The logistics are complicated. Transportation schedules need revision. Extracurricular activities need adjustment. Working parents face childcare timing challenges. These are real obstacles, but they're logistical, not biological. The biology says later start times for adolescents improve outcomes. The logistics say it's hard to implement. We choose logistics over health. The control impulse overrides the data, and chronotype flexibility remains rare. Morning meetings scheduled for 8 a.m. exclude effective participation from evening types. Decisions get made when half the team is cognitively impaired. Nobody tracks the cost. Nobody measures the loss. You can prioritize sleep as much as possible. You can try to find work with flexible hours. You can push for schedule changes at your workplace or your child's school. But the structural forces are powerful, and the cultural message remains: early waking equals success. The person who wakes at 5 a.m. is virtuous. The person who wakes at 9 a.m. is lazy. The judgment is pervasive, and it's scientifically backward. The research on forced early waking is clear. It causes sleep debt. It causes circadian misalignment. It causes metabolic dysfunction. It causes mental health decline. It causes cardiovascular risk. It impairs cognitive function. It reduces work productivity. It lowers academic performance. It increases accident risk. The mechanisms are understood. The pathway from chronotype mismatch through sleep disturbance to disease is documented. The dose response is clear: more misalignment, worse outcomes. The moderation is established. Lifestyle factors mediate some effects, but residual risk remains. The evidence is consistent across populations, study designs, and outcome measures. This isn't a niche finding. This is fundamental circadian biology. You cannot optimize your morning routine into being a different chronotype. What you can do is recognize the damage, acknowledge the cost, push back against the cultural assumption that early waking equals virtue, demand flexibility in your workplace, in your child's school, treat sleep timing as seriously as sleep duration, screen for social jet lag as a disease risk factor, advocate for chronotype recognition in healthcare and policy. The science supports it. The data demands it. The human suffering justifies it. In 2024, the population studies showed mental health effects of social jet lag. In 2025, the neural imaging studies showed brain structure differences by chronotype. The research builds year after year. The evidence strengthens. The conclusions sharpen. And still, most people believe waking early is just a matter of willpower. The final data point comes from the cortisol monitoring study published January 2025 in the Proceedings of the Royal Society. 201 healthy volunteers, continuous subcutaneous cortisol measurement. The researchers found that at a population level, the rate of cortisol increase was no different between the first hour of awakening and the preceding hour. Waking per se was not accompanied by a distinct acceleration in cortisol release. The best predictor of increased release was the level of cortisol reached in the hour preceding awakening. For long sleepers, maximal cortisol release occurred 97 minutes before waking. For short sleepers, 12 minutes after waking. For misaligned sleepers with greater than 1 hour variation in wake time, maximum rate of cortisol increase occurred at 68 minutes before waking. For aligned sleepers, 12 minutes after waking. Translation? Your body starts preparing to wake long before your alarm goes off. That preparation is timed by your circadian clock. Force the wake time out of sync with that preparation, and your stress hormone system can't do its job properly. The consequence isn't just grogginess, it's dysregulation of a fundamental endocrine axis, day after day, year after year, lifetime after lifetime. A 2-hour mismatch 5 days a week for 40 years adds up. The cardiovascular system notices. The metabolic system notices. The brain notices. We pretend it's normal. We call it adulthood. We blame people for not being morning people. The biology says otherwise. The damage is real. The evidence is overwhelming. And the solution is systemic, not individual. When researchers in Korea tracked workability using the Workability Index and productivity loss using the Work Productivity and Activity Impairment Questionnaire, they found evening chronotypes had 2.291 times higher odds of poor workability. The health-related productivity loss difference was 5.362% higher. These numbers translate to real economic costs. In a company of 1,000 employees, if 15% are evening types, that's 150 workers operating at 5.36% reduced productivity. The annual cost and lost output is substantial. Multiply across the entire workforce, and the national economic impact runs into billions. Yet companies continue mandating early start times. They measure attendance instead of output. They confuse presence with productivity. The data shows otherwise, but cultural inertia persists. The adjustment was more difficult for evening types. Sleep-wake rhythm shifted forward uncomfortably. Recovery was incomplete. Performance during morning rounds was impaired. Medical errors increased with sleep deprivation and circadian misalignment. Patient safety declines. Yet the medical training system persists with brutal schedules. The justification is tradition. The cost is measured in mistakes and lives. The attention deficits manifest in multiple domains. Working memory suffers, reaction time slows, vigilance declines. One study on the psychomotor vigilance task measured simple reaction time to visual stimuli. Late chronotypes tested at 8 a.m. showed mean reaction time significantly slower than their evening performance. The decrement wasn't trivial. Performance dropped to levels seen in mild sleep deprivation. But these weren't sleep-deprived subjects. They'd slept their normal duration. They were just tested at the wrong circadian phase. The impairment came from the mismatch alone. This has implications for any job requiring sustained attention. Drivers, machine operators, air traffic controllers, medical personnel. Anyone operating equipment or making decisions in the morning while fighting their chronotype operates below capacity. The accidents don't get tracked as chronotype failures. They get classified as human error. The root cause goes unrecognized. The network structure revealed how circadian misalignment propagates through the mental health system. Late chronotype leads to sleep disturbance. Sleep disturbance activates anxiety symptoms. Anxiety amplifies depression. Depression feeds back to worsened sleep. The cycle self-reinforces. Clinical interventions that target only depression or only anxiety miss the upstream factor, chronotype mismatch. Cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia helps. But if the insomnia stems from forced early wake times, the therapy treats symptoms while the cause persists. One study mentioned earlier found that maintaining good sleep habits and regular chronotype are important strategies for promoting emotional stability. But maintaining regular chronotype is impossible when your work starts at 7 a.m. and your biology wants to wake at 9. Research in China, research in Japan, research in Korea, research in the United States, research in Brazil, research in the Netherlands, research in Italy. The findings converge. Evening chronotypes face disadvantages in societies built for morning types. The magnitude varies by culture. In cultures with more rigid work schedules, the effects are stronger. In cultures with flexible hours, the effects attenuate. But the direction is always the same. Chronotype mismatch predicts worse outcomes. The universality suggests biological fundamentals, not cultural artifacts. The circadian timing of sleep stages matters for cognitive consolidation and emotional processing. Force an evening type to truncate their natural sleep period by waking early, and you're not just reducing total sleep time, you're disrupting the architecture. You're cutting off the later sleep cycles that may be especially important for their chronotype. The consequence isn't just sleepiness, it's impaired memory consolidation, reduced emotional regulation, and degraded cognitive restoration. When sleep-wake behavior misaligns with the master clock, peripheral oscillators can desynchronize from the master. This internal desynchrony creates what researchers call peripheral misalignment. Your liver thinks it's one time, your brain thinks it's another time. Metabolic dysfunction follows. Glucose metabolism loses coordination. Lipid metabolism loses coordination. Hormone secretion loses coordination. The system falls apart at the molecular level. Immune function. When the master circadian clock gets overridden by forced wake times, the ripple effects cascade through every system. The body is literally fighting itself. Genetic programs say one thing, behavioral demands say another. The conflict plays out in every cell. Social jet lag. Even after controlling for body mass index, sleep duration, and sleep quality, the circadian misalignment itself predicts inflammatory activation. Chronic low-grade inflammation is a driver of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, Alzheimer's disease, and autoimmune conditions. If social jet lag increases inflammation, then forcing chronotype mismatch increases risk for all inflammatory diseases. The pathway is plausible. The evidence is accumulating. The public health implications are enormous. But high schools start at 7:30 or 8 a.m. Teenagers are forced to wake while their circadian phase still signals night. They're chronically sleep deprived, cognitive performance suffers, mental health suffers, academic achievement suffers. Then society blames them for poor choices. The cruelty is structural. Some school districts pushed start times later. The results were immediate. Students slept more. Grades improved. Depression decreased. Car accident rates dropped. The evidence was unambiguous. Most districts haven't changed. The resistance comes from logistics and tradition, not data. Self-reported depression and anxiety decline. Caffeine consumption drops. The benefits are measurable within the first year. The costs are logistical. Bus schedules, after-school activities, parent work schedules. These are real challenges, but they're solvable. The question is whether we value adolescent health and academic achievement enough to solve them. Core hours. Flexibility means meetings happen between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. Early types start at 7. Late types start at 10. Both groups get their 8 hours but wake at their natural times. Output is measured by deliverables, not attendance. Remote work enables this naturally, but in-person work can accommodate it too. The technology exists. Video calls work regardless of location. Shared documents enable asynchronous collaboration. The barriers are cultural. Managers trained in industrial era supervision resist trusting employees without visual monitoring. The productivity data shows trust works. The chronotype data says flexibility is essential. The combination argues for systemic change. Some companies embraced it, most haven't. The holdouts pay in reduced productivity and higher employee burnout, but the costs diffuse across the workforce and go unmeasured. The public health perspective demands attention. If 20% of the population experiences clinically significant social jet lag, and social jet lag predicts cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity, depression, and cognitive decline, then social jet lag is a major modifiable risk factor, comparable to smoking or obesity. But unlike smoking and obesity, social jet lag receives no public health attention, no screening programs, no intervention campaigns, no policy changes. The awareness is absent. Doctors don't ask about chronotype. Schools don't consider circadian biology in scheduling. Employers don't accommodate biological variation. The result is millions of people suffering preventable health consequences because society refuses to acknowledge that not everyone wakes at the same time naturally. Individual level, educate people about chronotype. Provide tools to measure social jet lag. Teach circadian hygiene. Support people in negotiating flexible schedules. Clinical level, train healthcare providers to screen for social jet lag. Treat circadian misalignment as a disease risk factor. Prescribe chronotype appropriate schedules where possible. Institutional level, workplaces adopt flexible hours. Schools delay start times. Policy level, protect chronotype as a form of biological diversity deserving legal accommodation. The changes sound radical only because current practice is so entrenched. The evidence supports change. The suffering justifies it. The economic costs demand it. What's missing is collective will.